Renato, where do we got to start with Jared and Ivanka. So, as Zoe Lofgren just said, they seem to have faulty memories before they were they were under oath. Hopefully, the grand jury, as Zoe Lofgren said, will jog their memories. This is kind of a big deal, isn't it, legally?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not uncommon for people who have loyalty to someone to have faulty memories. That happens all the time in criminal investigations, and putting people like that in front of the grand jury is one of the main ways that you try to, as you pointed, jog their memory. I remember I had a girlfriend of a bank robber who was just she didn't remember anything and she didn't know anything and this and that, and I did put her in the grand jury, and I asked her very tough questions. And there's certain questions you ask if you understand that if you lie, you're committing perjury, this and that. And you're sitting there alone, no attorney by your side. You have no one on your side in that room, and it's just the prosecutor and the grand jury, and it can be intimidating.
And Renato is a former prosecutor. I mean, is Trump going to try to claim executive privilege again? And that would not be applicable. Close enough, that word. Applicable to Jared and Ivanka, would it? Or I mean, he will likely try it, right?
He'll try it. I mean, I think Jared, at the very least, I think Ivanka as well had some sort of executive branch title. I don't really think that these conversations, first of all, were part of any sort of executive branch deliberation. I mean, what's being investigated here is a scheme to essentially present false documents and false statements to the United States Senate in the form of these false certifications and false electors that they were trying to put before the United States Senate. So that's one way of looking at it. Another, obviously, thing that Jack Smith is investigating is a violent attack on the United States Capitol. I mean, neither of those are proper executive branch functions. So I think a court's going to certainly rule against Trump on that. But one thing I think that all of your listeners are learning and have learned over the last X number of years now, I've been talking about Trump legal issues since 2017, Stephanie.
God.
So one thing that is new to people listening, and that they've learned over the last years, but wasn't new to me as somebody in this area, is that things don't get wrapped up like they do on an episode of Law and Order in 47 minutes.
Yeah.
And taking time and dragging things out and creating delay and imposing costs on the other side is part of how the legal system works in the United States, and that's what Trump's going to try to do.
Yeah, well, as you said, you tweeted Mike Pence is making a bizarre and unprecedented argument in an attempt to avoid testifying before the grand jury. It looks like a surefire loser, but since it hasn't been made before, it will create delay and make it look like Pence isn't eager to testify against Trump.
Right. I mean, a lot of times people go to the legal system not to win, but to put pressure on the other side, to impose costs on the other side. In the case of Mike Pence, he's trying to convince the Trumpsters that he's not against Trump. He's not anti-Trump.
Yeah.
Because, my first reaction to this, Stephanie, when I heard he was being subpoenaed is, he probably invited the subpoena. He would love for Trump to go down and, clear the path in the primary.
Yeah.
And I think Pence and his team were concerned that was the impression being given. So I think that's purely... I'll call it performative. I use a fancy word, but purely him trying to create a narrative.
As is the case in this Trump era. There's breaking news.
About 6 minutes ago, Robert Costa
said in recent days, federal prosecutors have asked the chief judge in D.C.'s federal court to compel Mike Pence to comply with a grand jury subpoena and testify as a witness in special counsel Jack Smith's investigation. Per three people familiar with the investigation, the motion to compel Pence's testimony filed in secret to Chief Judge Beryl Howard in recent days came after lawyers for Trump asserted executive privilege in response to Pence's subpoena. So there you go, right?
Yeah, I'm not surprised, and frankly, I think Smith had to anticipate some sort of challenge. He would know on the front end. I view that as a surefire loser for Pence, or very likely loser. You can never predict what the Supreme Court is going to do, but very likely loser. But he's got to do what he's got to do. Pence is going to Pence, right?
Yeah, Pence got a Pence. You retweeted DOJ wants to compel Trump lawyer Evan Corcoran to testify under the crime fraud exception. You said this is an aggressive move by Jack Smith. It suggests Corcoran is a hostile witness despite his own potential liability for writing a false statement to law enforcement in the Mar-a-Lago matter. It would be significant if DOJ is able to use the crime fraud exception to compel his testimony. We always say on the show we have to differentiate which Trump crime we're talking about. Now we're to the we're to the classified documents off the Pence thing. But what is your take so far on Jack Smith? He does seem to be moving aggressively for those of us that are Veruca assaulting, as I like to call it, for justice.
It's so funny, Stephanie, because I don't know if you remember, but when Smith was appointed, there was a lot of hand-wringing. People thought this was some sort of delay tactic.
Yeah.
I was the exact opposite at the time. I always thought this was a good move. I supported it from the very beginning. I mean, and certainly if you're interested in things moving quickly, getting things out of the hands of a guy who had been a federal judge for 22 years. I mean, federal judges, their job is to look at both sides and carefully consider things and hand-wringing and making sure that you got every T crossed and I dotted. Prosecutors are about getting to the finish line in an efficient way, and they're aggressive. It's a different mentality. So Jack Smith's career prosecutor, no question to me that he was going to be more aggressive, and it's borne itself out. I mean, I don't think the reason I tweeted that, Stephanie, is I wanted people, like your listeners, to understand how aggressive this was. When I was when I was investigating crime as a federal prosecutor, if I wanted to subpoena an attorney, I had to get approvals from higher ups to just subpoena an attorney. Here, they're actually trying to use the fraud crime exception to get the attorney's testimony. I mean, that is something that's rarely done by DOJ because courts are very concerned about, the attorney-client privilege issue. So I think it's a very aggressive move by him, and it goes to show that I think he's moving this forward quite quickly.
You retweeted Fed's very likely to charge Trump lawyer. His colleagues warned the ex-president. You said this is the latest in a series of scoops by Rolling Stone, who appear to have a source within Trump's legal team. So, I mean, it feels like you are confident that things are moving forward in a expeditious manner. Yeah,
let's take a 10,000-foot view here for a second. There's no question in my mind that Trump's going to get charged in Fulton County. I mean, I think I was convinced of that a few weeks ago or a few months ago, a couple of months ago. But now it's obvious, right? You had that four-person come out and basically wink, wink, nod, tell us that that's happening. I think regarding Jack Smith, I mean, he is without a doubt moving full steam ahead, and perhaps more aggressively than I thought he would in certain respects. I didn't think this January 6th stuff was going to be front and center. I thought he was going to focus more on Mar-a-Lago.
Interesting.
That's an easier case to bring. So I do think there, he's clearly, if you're using the crime fraud exception and you're going after these attorneys, he's clearly looking at whether he can charge an obstruction case.
Yeah.
On the documents, that's a straightforward
isn't it nice that's illegal again after we let the 10 instances go in the Mueller report? It's nice that obstruction might actually be considered a crime, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things, that's a great point, Stephanie. One of the things that's really not talked about enough is what happened to all the stuff that Garland inherited regarding, let's say, the Mueller report. And also, by the way, what about all of the bizarre abuses in the Justice Department during the Trump era? Remember when they were Barr was intervening in the Mike Flynn sentencing and all these prosecutors were resigning? Why haven't we heard anything about that? I mean, that to me is the biggest concern that I have.
Thank you. Oh my God, I knew I loved you for a reason. Speaking of the chatty Georgia four-person, yes. Bob Costa also tweeted, CBS News has learned lawyers close to several GOP witnesses in Fulton County investigation are preparing to move to quash any possible indictments by the DA based on the public statements by the forewoman of the special grand jury. And you say these efforts are likely going to fail, but this is still a distraction that will burden the Fulton County DA's office. You had one tweet that said she's violating her oath, and you said, I deleted this tweet because the rule in Georgia appears to cover only deliberations, which is more narrow than the rule elsewhere. It's still a very bad idea, may carry legal risk for her, and will likely provide Trump and others with arguments to challenge the indictments. In total, though, what is your assessment? I mean, would they actually succeed in trying to get things thrown out because of this?
It's very complicated. My podcast is called It's Complicated, and this is a great example of it's complicated. So my initial reaction to this four-person was like, oh my God, because just the rule in the federal rule and the rule in most states is that the grand jury not only deliberations, but everything that goes on before the grand jury is sacrosanct. No one can talk about it, and that's why you don't see this happening in other cases, right? And so it's not like whether it's in Alec Baldwin's grand jury in New Mexico or a federal grand jury indicting Michael Cohen, it's not like you have these grand jurors coming forward. So yes, Georgia law is very narrow here. That was something I'm not a Georgia lawyer, wasn't aware of, but I will say, we just talked about a moment ago, Stephanie, how the law is not so black and white, and how merely whether you succeed or not is not the test. And so what I think is going to happen here is a bunch of motions are going to get filed about this. They're going to lose, but it's a distraction and time consuming and all of this that we didn't need to have. The analogy I would draw actually is remember those texts between Lisa Page and Peter Strzok?
Yeah.
Which whole sideshow, had nothing to do with what Mueller was doing. It was just like a couple of FBI personnel who had an affair. But it was used as such a distraction, and we had all these investigations and hearings about a total sideshow. That's what I view this. And I think, as somebody who's tried a lot of criminal cases, both as a prosecutor and on the defense side, I think the defense attorneys at trial would try to find ways to backdoor this in front of the jury. Totally improper, but I think they're going to just try to use this to cast some sort of view that things are unfair. And there's an element of truth to it with her, that enough of a color or thing that makes us uncomfortable that it's gonna be create some problems.
Yeah. Well, I had one more tweet I wanted to just get your legal take on whether this is a thing or not. They said impropriety after the grand jury convened is different than impropriety during the grand jury proceeding. There is nothing she can say that will get an indictment thrown out after the grand jury is already convened. Is that true?
I think that's right. I don't think the indictments are going to get thrown out. She's not from the grand jury that's indicting, and this happened afterwards. All of that is true. I think the more problematic stuff that she said are the things that made it look like her and the grand jury were too chummy with the prosecutors, like how she's eating a popsicle. She had a Ninja Turtle ice cream sandwich or something that she was eating from that the prosecutors gave her because she was at their party. Like stuff like that is somewhat problematic, but I don't think this is going to get thrown out. But I will just say I've gotten a lot of comments on Twitter from people like, "You're wrong, Mariotti. This is not going to succeed, and so therefore this is you're just you're wrong." It's not a black and white thing. Yes, it's going to fail, just like this Pence argument is going to fail, but it's a colossal waste of time and a distraction.
Yeah. It's interesting. You speaking of Pence real quick, as you quoted Judge Ludwig, who's a longtime Republican. You said insightful thread by Judge Ludwig explaining why any protection afforded the vice president is due to his limited legislative function would be quite narrow in the face of a criminal investigation by the executive branch. They seem to have just taken a page from Trump's legal playbook, right? Just delay. Whatever's going to, delay this and hope that politics will, kick in, right?
Yeah, and I'm going to give Pence's team some credit here. They came up with an argument no one's ever made before, probably because there haven't been these crazy circumstances before. But nonetheless, one thing I was told when I was a young lawyer decades ago was that there's always a chance of judicial, the way the senior lawyer told me is judicial error. There's always a chance the judge is going to make a mistake. So if there's billions of dollars at stake for our client and we throw something out there that there's a 10% chance the judge is going to screw it up, that could be a win for our client, potentially. Yeah. And so I think just giving the chance for a judge to screw up or throwing out an argument that's going to potentially throw a wrench in the works, there's always a danger there. And so that's why I take those things seriously, and I don't just say, some law book tells me that this is likely not going to work out, or Judge Ludwig is genius telling me it's not going to work out. And so I can disregard it. I think it's a concern, and it certainly could potentially be more than a time-wasting tactic if judges do something we don't expect.
Yeah. One last one, speaking of which. Arizona's then Attorney General Mark Brnovich scuttled a report that debunked claims of election fraud following the 2020 election. Investigators prepared a report stating virtually all claims of error and malfeasance were unfounded, according to internal documents reviewed by the Washington Post. Well, this is the same thing Trump campaign did, which goes to, consciousness of guilt, right? That he knew he lost, that he commissioned, and obviously hid the findings that there was no fraud. But what happens when the Attorney General does this and puts the imprimatur of the Attorney General on it? Is he legally liable?
Well, I mean, he should be impeached and removed, but I think that,
Right.
I don't think there's a crime there, because essentially what he did is he just misused public resources, hid the truth, and lied to the public. That's an abuse of his position. He should be removed. I don't know enough about Arizona to know whether that's possible. I'm guessing not. But I think this reminds me of a lot of things that happened during the Trump era, where Trump would do sort of evil things, but I don't think they're necessarily criminal.
Depressing. Okay. And finally, you tweeted.
Sorry.
You tweeted the last time some states decided to separate from the Union, the Civil War made clear for all time that we are indivisible. We are all in this together. Advocating for the dissolution of the United States is treasonous and un-American, which is why I'm wearing my I Am American t-shirt this morning. Thank you. I keep calling it this casual treason. This casual, well, let's have a civil war. Let's succeed. Let's overturn the results of a free and fair election. I mean, it has got to stop. You're right. It is un-American and it is treason.
Yeah, Stephanie, I got to tell you, I follow these right wingers, and I'm concerned because this is a growing trend on the right to advocate for this. This Jesse Kelly guy does it a lot. A lot of these right wingers are advocating for the dissolution of the United States, and I can't imagine anything more un-American. And it really, the reason I use the word traitor is, I mean, the last people who tried to dissolve the Union were the Southerners when they wanted to uphold white supremacy in the South, and that was treasonous. And we dealt with that by reconquering the South, putting an end to that for all time. And I just think that I think need to take back on the left, and progressives need to take back patriotism and the unity of the United States. We're all in this together. I think that's a powerful concept that we should be trumpeting and we should be advocating for.
We've gone way long because I waited way too long to get you, so we're going to have to next time not make it so long. Legal analyst for MSNBC and CNN, Renato Mariotti. It's Complicated is the podcast. Please come back sooner rather than later.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. I hope you'll join me on my new audio podcast, Justice Matters. I'll be using my 30 years as a federal prosecutor and Army JAG to unpack, break down, and explain the legal issues of the day, particularly where the legal intersects with the political. Please look for Justice Matters with Glenn Kirshner wherever you generally get your podcasts.